Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight, it's getting down to the wire when it comes to the future of Illinois' nuclear plants. We have the latest.
These negotiations were, to put it mildly, exceedingly difficult.
A new police contract moves ahead as the department faces a lawsuit over stop and frisk. Our Spotlight Politics team dives in.
One doctor calls it a twindemic. What to expect with the upcoming flu season during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Signs are okay, but they do not save lives.
The Chicago Park District says it has a plan to address drownings in Lake Michigan, but swim safety advocates say it's not enough.
A new bill will soon allow students in Illinois to take up to 5 mental health days. We have details.
Meet a woman making it her mission to help feed the homeless.
Our founders, who were creatures of the Enlightenment, men of reason, tried to create a representative democracy.
And remembering Adlai Stevenson III, the Illinois politician who died on Monday. But first, some of today's top stories. Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul announces the state will open an investigation into the Joliet Police Department. Raoul says the office will investigate possible unconstitutional or unlawful patterns and practices, especially as it relates to searches, traffic and pedestrian stops, use of force, and arrests. Now, the investigation was opened following requests from Joliet's Mayor Bob Odenkirk and some members of the town's city council. Raoul says his office reviewed thousands of documents and concluded the investigation was warranted.
This will be a civil investigation that will examine whether there are systemic issues within the department that affect the Joliet Police Department's ability to police in a safe, effective, and lawful manner. While our investigation will review specific incidents, we will not be making specific findings about one incident or any one Joliet Police Department officer.
Chicago is now one step closer to cannabis dispensaries downtown. A city council committee signed off on the plan backed by the mayor to allow cannabis stores in the central business area, although they would not be allowed on Michigan Avenue. The mayor says the plan could help Black and Latino business owners get in on dispensary business. This as the state has had numerous problems with its lottery process to award permits. Current rules divide the city up into 7 zones, of which 14 pot dispensaries are allowed per zone. And of course, City Council's the full council will have to consider that plan now too. And a big shakeup in the local healthcare industry. 2 big suburban healthcare groups are merging into one. North Shore University Health System and Edward Elmhurst Health announced the merger earlier today. The new group would have hospitals on the north side of Chicago as well as the North Shore, Northwest, and western suburbs. The new system would reportedly have 25,000 employees. And up next, the latest on the future of Illinois' nuclear fleet, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabee family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
We hope you've got some energy for this next segment. The Illinois House is reconvening tomorrow for what they hope will be the penultimate chapter of years-long energy negotiations. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with the latest. Amanda, where do things stand?
Well, Brandis, to say that negotiations have been going on for years is, in this case, not an exaggeration, but it really is, well, down to the wire for getting a far-reaching omnibus energy package passed, and that is because Exelon has been steadfast that it will begin to shut down its nuclear plant in Byron unless a bill is passed by Monday's end. And that would be a law that would have ratepayers paying an extra charge on electric bills to keep Exelon nuclear plants running. Advocates say that nuclear is needed to meet the package's broader goals, that is, of moving Illinois first to carbon-free, then to all renewable energy sources versus coming from natural gas and coal sources. Now, just last week, the Illinois Senate passed a measure that would do just that, and that package, as well as, by the way, there are some others floating around, have some things in common. The Exelon component, also the target of transitioning to all renewable energy, really within decades by 2050, and then also another subsidy, also paid for by ratepayers, that would help the state to get to that point of all renewable energy by creating a fund that solar and wind developers could draw on to move forward with their renewable energy projects. Now, all told, you could see customers paying $3.50 or so on their average monthly electric bill to cover both of those subsidies, those supports. Now, that part, at least, Brandis, is by and large settled.
So, Amanda, then what's the holdup?
Well, this really has to do with a coal-fired power plant, and it is called Prairie State Energy Campus, and that is in Marissa, so in the southwestern part of the state. It is Illinois' newest coal-fired power plant, and one that, according to federal data, is responsible for the 7th highest carbon emissions in the nation, with more than 12.6 million metric tons emitted in 2019, the latest we had data available. Now, while this plant itself is really in central Illinois, some 40 municipalities throughout the state have contracts to get exclusively their community's energy from Prairie State, and that includes suburbs like Rochelle, Batavia, and Naperville. Environmentalists, also Governor J.B. Pritzker, say any legislation that they agree to must have a hard date to close all coal-fired plants, including Prairie State. Now, the latest proposal would have Prairie State closed by 2045, but they also say it has to ratchet down emissions leading up to that date.
All of the climate scientists have said that it is a code red for humanity and that we need to move forward in reducing carbon emissions as quickly as possible. And that doesn't mean that they should stay on and squeak by and still emit carbon. We need to get rid of all of the carbon emissions related to the power sector. So having an end date for these sources and when they are going to close is incredibly important to be able to meet those goals.
But Prairie State has said that it can't afford what's really expensive carbon sequestration technology that could cost millions, if not even $1 billion or more dollars, if then it also has to prematurely close shortly thereafter. So a new proposal aims to solve that. This is a measure put forth by State Representative Marcus Evans. It adds another charge to ratepayers' electric bills of about 10 cents a month is what it would work out, and that would go to Prairie State to help pay for reducing emissions there. But in a statement you have from mayors of Breeze, Rochelle, and also an energy cooperative that has a contract with Prairie State, they say no dice to this new plan. That proposed language will require our residents and residents across Illinois to pay more money for less reliable power, all while sacrificing hundreds of good-paying jobs in the process. Ratepayers will be forced to live with the decision by lawmakers as it will be reflected in their electric bill for decades to come. Now, Suburban Geneva is another town that would be on the hook. It has bond obligations to pay for a power agreement with Prairie State through 2041. And Mayor Kevin Burns says that he does back this transition to clean energy. But he says if Illinois is going to go that route, Geneva needs to be compensated if Prairie State is going to, as part of it, have to cut production before then. He told me this afternoon it will be a tsunami of rate increases if we are not provided some sort of soft landing financially, support from either the state, the feds, or a combination thereof. We are 100% behind this clean energy transition, but it has to be done in a way that communities like ours are not left in the dark. No pun intended. Now, environmental groups who are a key constituency in negotiations do support this latest version.
I see this pathway towards which we can be aligned and we can move forward to solve all of these critical issues together, including addressing the climate crisis, including saving jobs at energy facilities and solar jobs, including creating new workforce and equity programs throughout the state.
Walling says there is a pathway, but that pathway does require support from another major stakeholder, and that is organized labor. So far, an umbrella organizations for unions has not come out in favor of this new plan, with the spokesperson only saying it remains under review. Now, negotiations are continuing still this evening after state representatives met for hours about it today in a meeting that's been described as robust, a bit ruckus. Now, there is a lot at play here. Got climate change, jobs, electricity prices, more jobs. We could see even more proposals floated tonight, perhaps tomorrow, when the members of the House will be back in Springfield. Now, Illinois Environmental Council's Jen Walling says, despite the lack of an agreement at this late hour, she does believe that something is going to pass. She says she cannot imagine a scenario in which nothing happens. It's too big a risk, she says, politically and on other levels.
If we don't move forward with an energy package, the cost to Illinois is incredibly high. We're already in the midst of a pandemic where people's jobs are being impacted. And if we do not move forward with a package at all, it is going to mean, in our interest, we're very interested in what happens with those solar jobs. It's going to mean closures. It's going to mean a lack of economic investment in the state from the solar industry, as well as the closure of those nuclear facilities. And that could be just catastrophic.
Now, if the House does agree on pass a measure tomorrow, it still is going to need Senate approval. The Senate not set to be at the Capitol on Thursday, but they'll return Friday, perhaps Monday, if there is something for them to vote on. And again, if it is Monday, then it really will be down to the wire, because that is the final date. Exelon says something has to happen by, or again, that plant in Byron will be shuttered, the corporation says. With that, Brandis, back to you.
Okay, Amanda Lutz, thank you. And now to Paris and some advice on navigating the flu season. Paris.
Yeah, Brandis, some doctors are calling the upcoming flu season a twindemic. And as flu season starts in the fall, the country is still grappling with the spike in COVID-19 cases, driven largely by the Delta variant. Joining us to talk about how to protect yourself against the flu is Dr. Lisa Ravindra, an internal medicine primary care physician with Rush University Medical Center. Dr. Ravindra, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me on.
So there were concerns last year about a twindemic, and it didn't really materialize, at least with the flu. Why not?
Yeah, that's right. We first started hearing about the concept of a twindemic last fall, going into our first winter with COVID, and then the concern that on top of the burden that COVID was putting on our medical system, that we were worried about flu also burdening further the hospitals. It didn't actually pan out, which is a good thing, but I think there's a lot of reasons why that didn't happen last year. We were under really strict COVID measures to mitigate COVID. People were masking, people weren't going to school and work like they are now. And a lot of people got the flu vaccine. More people than usual got the flu vaccine last year. In fact, a lot of my patients were really eager in getting the vaccine before I even would bring it up at visits, knowing that they didn't want to have both illnesses be an issue in the winter.
So a lot of factors. What are doctors predicting for this upcoming flu season, noting that kids are by and large back in school?
Yeah, so the flu season is notoriously hard to predict. So we still have to find out. So I'm hoping that our warnings last year were able to convince people to get the flu shot, and this year we'll do the same. But it looks like there's several models that are predicting a very severe flu season, and that's because kids are back in school, people aren't masking as much, aren't doing the same measures. But also for a few different reasons. Usually, even if people aren't exposed to or don't get symptoms from the flu, they're still exposed to the flu at some point during the flu season and develop some antibodies that carry over into the next season. But since there was no flu circulating last year, most people didn't get exposed. So their immunity level or antibody level is going to be much lower and have older antibodies that may not be able to fight the strain that's coming out.
So the downsides of not having a very robust flu season, and as I understand, kids are vectors of the flu, so does it stand to reason that if they're back in school and they're in tight quarters, they might spread the flu, to the general population?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's super important for anybody over the age of 6 months, children included, to get the flu vaccine. And I would say start getting it now. We just got flu vaccine into my office at Rush River North, and I'm advising all of my patients to get vaccinated as soon as possible. There's no reason to wait, so do it now.
What about concerns from people that took the COVID-19 vaccine and wonder, is it safe to take the flu vaccine in close proximity?
Yes. So initially when the COVID vaccine came out last winter, we were advising patients to wait 14 days between getting any other immunizations, but that recommendation is gone now. It's safe to get all the flu shot and the COVID-19 vaccine all together at the same time, same day. There's no reason to space them out. So if somebody's eligible for the booster shot or the third shot, I recommend getting everything as soon as possible.
Going back to, you're saying models are predicting a pretty heavy flu season, beyond kids being in school, maybe not social distancing as much. What are the other factors that go into that modeling?
So in years past, we've looked at the southern hemisphere, so countries like Australia, to see how their flu season went, and because they have flu season during our summer, so theirs is just ending now. They had a very light season again this year, but they're also much more strict about COVID measures, and not their borders are still mostly closed, and so I don't think that we can really base it on their model because we're functioning differently in our country. But yeah, there's a lot of factors that go into it. And a lot of times we use the strains from previous seasons to predict strains of the flu this year, but it's much harder to do when the flu was so light last year.
All right, a lot of things for parents to watch out for on top of COVID and being back in class. And our thanks to Dr. Lisa Ravindra. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And now to Brandis for details into a new school policy change to address mental health. Brandis.
Paris, starting in January, Illinois students ages 7 through 17 can take up to 5 mental or behavioral health days off from school without having to provide a doctor's note. Under the new law, recently signed by Governor J.B. Pritzker, students are referred to school staff for professional help after their second mental health day. Joining us to discuss this new legislation and what it could mean for the mental health of children are Dr. Tara Gill, psychologist and mental health consultant with Lurie Children's Center for Childhood Resilience and assistant professor at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine, and State Senator Robert Martwick, a Democrat who represents parts of Chicago's Northwest Side. Thanks to you both for joining us. State Senator Martwick, let's start with you, please. Why was it important for you to introduce this bill?
Well, it was pretty clear that with the perfect storm that was created by the pandemic, the amount of pressure that was put upon our student population was showing very identifiable results. We saw nationwide suicide rates amongst the children aged 15 to 24 just skyrocket. In fact, becoming the second leading cause of death amongst age population suicide, and it push in the General Assembly to address them, but it does no good to offer the programming, and this was one way of letting students know that by removing that stigma, that it was okay for them to address their mental health and seek the help that they need.
And Senator Martwick, thank you. I think you broke up a little bit, but I think we got the crux of what you were getting at. Dr. Gill, how can 5 mental health days be useful for students over the course of the school year?
Thank you. That's a great question. I believe that if we empower youth, particularly older youth, to identify when they're feeling challenged mentally, just as well as we might allow them to acknowledge when they're feeling challenged physically, they can learn to utilize those days to be more of a benefit. And I think that with proper legislation and changes in policy at the school district level, you'll be able to have youth to have skills developed to learn how to most benefit from those days.
And Dr. Gill, sticking with you for just a second, what impact has COVID had on the mental health of young people?
Yes, COVID is a condition that has definitely been challenging for youth, families, and the mental health and healthcare system. It has definitely caused an increase in youth who are presenting in ERs and in psychology clinics, and caused an increase in waiting lists, as well as less adults in the presence of kids to identify them at a prevention level. And so when they do present, they tend to have increased level of severity of symptoms with much more complexity.
Senator
You'll see a lot more anxiety and depression.
Okay. Senator Martwick, have you noticed less of a stigma as of late around mental health and among youth and children?
Well, I think that there's been a move through societally, which is a good thing, it is less of a stigma around addressing mental health, and that has been part of the messaging that mental health care is a part of overall health care. We have to attend to all of the parts of our body, not just if we have a cough or a fever, but if we are having mental health issues, we need to attend to that. Again, when we saw the rising suicide rates among students, we said to ourselves, okay, there is a disconnect there where these children are suffering through mental health problems, but they don't have that ability to connect and suffer in silence, and that leads to what we see are really bad outcomes. And so this bill was designed just to do that, to say, hey, if you need to take a day off, just as if you wake up one day and you've got a fever, if you wake up one day and you're really feeling that stress and pressure, you can take a day off and attend to that. If after a number of days, you're still not able to get the help you need, then the school has the permission to refer you then to a counselor, a school psychologist, a social worker, to help connect you to those resources so that you can attend to that, to those issues before they become problematic.
And Senator, how does this bill ensure that young people are actually getting the support they need on those mental health days and they're not just playing hooky?
Well, it doesn't, and that's the short answer. I've been asked that question a lot, and my response is this, and I think there's a fair amount of skepticism. What about those kids who will take advantage of this? To which I say, it doesn't matter if we pass this bill or not. Those kids that would seek to take advantage of skipping school are going to do that regardless of what we put in the law. This is about making sure that the kids that need mental health have that access to it, and that certainly was the motivation there. We would rather offer those that need the help the opportunity to get to it than protect against those that were going to take advantage of it either way.
Dr. Gill, what do you think adults, parents, teachers, other staff, what can they do to help kids and youth feel more comfortable coming forward about their mental health concerns and needs?
So you find that youth are reporting that they have less stigma about accessing mental health services, less stigma about asking for help and support. However, when they do reach out to adults need to have the right amount of education and skills to help them to navigate systems of support, whether that's a school system that is providing mental health access within that building, or whether that's getting a first appointment at a clinic or a hospital or presenting at an ER. So I do think that is one of the cautions of understanding the implementation of this law. Essentially is what will be the structure and policies put in place by experts and at the school level to ensure that youth are getting the support that they need beyond when they call in, as well as during that time.
And to that end, what more do we need to be doing? Maybe apart from this bill, or maybe, in conjunction with this bill, but what more do we need to be doing to ensure that young people are getting the mental and emotional support they need, especially returning to in-person school this year?
Yes. So what we have found is that some school districts, even here in Chicago, are investing in building out systems and supports to make sure that the people inside of the building are talking to one another, whether that is building out a referral process where students can self-refer. They've indicated in a pilot study that was done by Chicago Public Schools this summer, they've indicated that they are interested in referring themselves if they are in need of supports, and just getting adults together in the building to talk about which students need more support and how they can identify that. Chicago is invested in something called behavioral health systems or behavioral health teams that is allowing adults to come together and help to solve that challenge.
And this goes into effect in January. We'll be keeping an eye on how students are using it. In the meantime, thanks to our guests, Dr. Tara Gill and State Senator Robert Martwick.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Up next, a woman from Des Plaines opens her kitchen to help those in need. Stay with us. Is there anything that these police departments can do to earn trust from the community at this point? What inspired you to propose this bill?
We need some legislation. We've got to turn the page on this history.
What are the ways in which we can hold institutions accountable while also providing an opportunity for community to show up and not only just demand, but ask that we build these bridges together, because I think that that's the only way that we're truly going to get free.
And there's much more ahead on the program, including our Spotlight Politics team on the new police union contract that's soon heading to the full city council for a vote. But first, a local woman is using social media to help feed the homeless. Chicago Tonight's Joanna Hernandez visited Des Plaines to see how she's opened her kitchen to make thousands of lunches for those most in need.
I didn't think about it very much, just that I wanted to help in some small way.
It's a busy afternoon in Anne-Marie's Frank's kitchen. An all-hands-on-deck operation, Operation Loving Lunches to be exact.
We just hit our 15,000th lunch last Sunday. I am just amazed because I posted on Facebook and got the entire Des Plaines community involved.
Frank, along with family members and volunteers, come together every Sunday to pack up lunches for the homeless. It started when Frank's sister's job was looking for people to donate food when COVID forced some pantries to close their doors.
I wanted to help and had a job and was so grateful that my family and I started to put together lunches and invited, my family to help. And then it just kept growing and growing. And I was really busy, and I told my sister at that point it was getting hard for me to make the lunches.
So I just kind of ran with it. I was so excited when I saw how many a week we could make, and the more people we had, the more we could make. So we started with about 100 to 200 a week, and then some weeks we had 300, depending on how many volunteers we could get.
The Sisters Project, Loving Lunches, quickly expanded. Frank opened her home to anyone willing to volunteer their time or donate food like fruit, protein bars, juice boxes, and sandwich meat.
We deliver it to downtown Chicago, and from there will deliver it to churches. We also deliver local. We'll go to the viaducts along the Kennedy Expressway where the tent cities are, and we will definitely drop off lunches under all of those stops.
The movement quickly spread to Frank's dance studio, AMA Academy of Performing Arts. Frank's daughter says starting this initiative has given her mother a new purpose after she had to shut down her dance studio and go virtual.
I know that it really meant a lot to her as our business was kind of in an unknown, uncharted territory, to have something kind of solid that we could feel we were doing our part to help the community.
Frank's daughter, Kendall, helps her mom run the dance studio where they offer a variety of classes, from jazz, tap dancing, and music classes.
Living with my mom, I get to see firsthand how hard she works, how much passion she has for the projects that she's doing, whether it's here at AMA or with the Loving Lunches.
For the last year, Frank and anyone willing to join the movement have made hundreds of lunches each week with handmade cards that her youngest students create.
You are amazing, like a flower bending in the wind but not breaking.
Frank hopes the small gesture helps brighten someone's day.
I gave a gentleman a couple lunches, and I was stuck at the light, and I just watched him. I just observed, and he took out the card, read it, put it by his heart, and then he was looking for me to just say, hey, thanks. It was amazing.
Moving forward, Frank is working to turn Loving Lunches into a non-profit, a mission these sisters know their parents would be proud of.
It just warms me to follow in her footsteps. They always were very giving. We didn't grow up with much, like a lot of people didn't. And my mom always donated her time.
She did. She was the kindest, always would help someone else.
What would you think she would say about what you all are doing as a family?
She would love it.
She'd want to be right in the middle of this.
We wanted to be making some sandwiches for sure.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Joanna Hernandez.
And you can learn how to get involved with Loving Lunches by visiting our website, where we have details on that and much more. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thanks. That's the kind of story that fills you right up. Still to come on Chicago Tonight. The Park District says it has a plan to improve do not swim messaging along the city's lakefront, but safety advocates say it's not enough. Lawmakers return to Springfield in hopes of passing an energy bill as Republicans renew calls for ethics reform. That and more in Spotlight Politics. And remembering former U.S. Senator Adlai Stevenson, the third who died on Monday. But first, some more of today's top stories. Chicago's travel advisory now includes all 49 other states in the country, as well as all territories. The Chicago Department of Public Health updated the advisory today to add just one state, Vermont, which had been left off last week. 2 states, New Hampshire and Connecticut, plus the District of Columbia, have seen cases drop below 15 new cases per day per 100,000 people and could be removed next week if cases remain under that threshold. Last week, CDPH updated the advisory to require unvaccinated travelers to test before and after arrival in Chicago and quarantine for 7 days, even if they test negative upon arrival. Some former federal prison inmates are getting a second chance at life.
I've probably been clean for probably about 8 months now. And come on, Daddy. Excuse me, but that was because the tools that the program was giving me to use to be law-abiding citizen, to be a better person.
Prince Ferguson, along with 10 other people, graduated from the James B. Moran Second Chance Reentry Program. The federal court program is designed to help former inmates reintegrate into communities and receive supervision and frequent meetings with judges, probation officers, and treatment providers. Those who complete it successfully are rewarded with a reduction in federal supervision. Their keynote speaker today was Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Some Chicago residents who have a complaint against a police officer could have the opportunity to mediate the complaint rather than the traditional complaint investigation process. The city announced the pilot program today as part of the consent decree overseen by a federal court. Only select police misconduct complaints filed with the Civilian Office of Police Accountability or CPD's Bureau of Internal Affairs will qualify, including allegations related to perceived bias in policing or failures to provide appropriate service. Under the pilot, slated to launch this fall, a trained mediator would facilitate a discussion between the officer and complainant with the goal of addressing the problem in a way that both parties agree on. And now, Paris, we toss it back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. The Chicago Park District released a plan today to better reinforce do not swim messaging around the city's lakefront. This after public cries for life rings to be installed following recent drownings in Lake Michigan. The mother of 19-year-old Miguel Cisneros, who drowned last month, spoke at a vigil honoring her son last night.
I hope that my Mikey, whose middle name was Angel, will be our angel in finally getting our city and Park District officials to make a change and provide the safety equipment our lakefront desperately needs and should be offered, minimum.
Very sad story there. WTTW News reporter Patty Wetley joins us now with more. So, Patty, what is the Park District's plan to reinforce do not swim messaging around the lakefront, as this came up at their board meeting today?
Yeah, so a lot of their plan seems focused on deterring people from entering the water at places that are dangerous or that they're not safe for swimming locations. So that means beefing up signage, adding it places, reinstalling it maybe where it's been taken down, refreshing paint at places where people should not be entering the water. Also partnering with organizations and community leaders in getting out the word, more outreach and education around where people can swim on the lakefront, what hours, how to read the safety flags to know when there's a red flag up, don't enter the water. And most dramatically, they plan to put barriers up at some of the more dangerous places along the lakefronts, like piers, and, basically blocking public access to those spots to keep people out of the water.
And are swim safety advocates okay with these plans? Do they think they go far enough?
No, they actually think that the emphasis on people entering the water at places that are not safe to swim is kind of a form of victim blaming and placing the fault on the people for going into the water there versus the simplicity of having those life rings or flotation devices available for bystanders to throw in to help someone who's in trouble in the water.
And does the park district plan on installing life rings anywhere along the lakefront?
Well, you know, people have done some DIY efforts that the park district has taken down because their stance is that the presence of these devices encourages people to enter the water where they shouldn't. But they are going to try a pilot in summer 2022, and they're going to identify some locations where it's safe for people to swim, so only locations where people should be swimming, and to put the life rings there. So it's kind of a compromise, and I'm sure this is not the last we're going to hear of this issue.
Nope, I would agree with that, Patty, and we will keep following it. All right, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Patty's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And up next, City Council members are up for raises, but will they take them? Our Spotlight Politics team on that and more. But first, we take a look at the weather.
A Chicago City Council member under fire over offensive language and for allegedly retaliating against a constituent. A Chicago police contract is one step closer to approval as the department faces a class action lawsuit over stop and frisk practices. And state lawmakers return to take up a comprehensive energy bill as Republicans call for more ethics reform. Here with all of that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. And a lot to talk about, gang. So, Heather, let's start with you. More details have emerged this week about offensive remarks that Alderman Jim Gardner made about colleagues and constituents. What's the latest there?
Well, there were more texts revealed today by the People's Fabric, a blog on the Northwest Side that has really targeted Alderman Gardner, that basically showed him targeting constituents with whom he disagrees politically for a lack of city services and using derogatory names. That report came after Mayor Lori Lightfoot was asked about this on Monday after Labor Day celebration, and she said it was never appropriate for a public official not to provide city services to someone simply because they didn't vote for them or disagree. So now the question becomes, now that there are texts that show that, what action does the mayor take? It's not clear.
And Paris, Alderman Gardner, you know, he's apologized, but still facing some heavy criticism. Does he need to do more to weather this storm?
Brandis, there's a letter to the ethics board from Alderman Sadlowski Garza calling on action and calling on him to apologize. Nearly half of the city council colleagues have signed on to that, but his problems run far deeper than offensive language. There's a laundry list of complaints from constituents who feel like they have been retaliated against for opposing him or his initiatives. I've talked to a handful of them in the last few days. Block Club Chicago's done a nice job documenting some of this. There was a brick through one constituent's window, a car that drove up onto a constituent's lawn and destroyed the garden. City inspectors sent over to a constituent's home. Now, to be clear, Gardner is not accused of anything, of any wrongdoing, and there's no evidence connecting him to these things, but these constituents feel that they were retaliated against. These incidents happened in close proximity to them being critical of the alderman. As Heather mentioned, there are those text messages that show an apparent vindictive streak against constituents that aren't, he believes, loyal to him. He, in fact, suggested that a former staffer leak out a court document on a constituent that would be used as dirt against that constituent. So these are, again, a lot of questions raised because of this, and I have a number of constituents told me they filed complaints with the Inspector General's office. This is something that's under the IG's purview. That doesn't mean that they're opening an investigation. There are also 2 federal lawsuits that constituents have filed against Gardner that are moving forward. I did try to reach out to Gardner today, was not able to get a hold of him, but a lot of questions here in the 45th Ward on the Northwest Side.
Okay. So moving on, an 8-year contract with the union representing rank-and-file Chicago police officers got key approval from a panel of aldermen yesterday. Here's some of what the city's chief negotiator had to say.
These negotiations were, to put it mildly, exceedingly difficult in terms of the length of time it took to negotiate. It's a touch over 4 years now, and we've never had an agreement that quite took that long.
Now, Amanda, assuming this gets, full city council approval, do you think this will do anything to repair the relationship between police and city leaders, or police and, more importantly, community members?
Brandis, so as you noted, it still does need city council approval before it's fully signed, stamped, delivered. And to answer your question, I don't necessarily think so. I was, kind of going back and reviewing what all is in the contract, and I saw a quote from FOP's president saying they hate her about his members in regard to Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Not mincing words there, and in that note, there's a big membership of the FOP, but by and large, that seems to be the sentiment of Chicago's police force, not believing in and backing Mayor Lightfoot. And there certainly is a disagreement. We're going to see it rear that head even with the contract in budget talks, when you're going to have community organizations calling for defunding or at least lesser funding of the CPD, even as you have other alder people and Brown asking for additional money to cover beyond what is in this contract, so that to hire more police officers, to pay more overtime, or again hire more officers to be able to reduce that. And still ongoing negotiations. That contract done but not necessarily completed, as there continues to be talks about how to implement some changes in state laws and further what the mayor would call reform, what I think many CPD officers would say it does not meet the definition of reform. They would say it would make it even further, even hinder them doing their jobs.
And Heather, remind us, what are some of the key provisions of this contract?
Well, you can really put this contract in 2 buckets. One is a 20% pay raise over 8 years. So this deal covers all the way back to 2017 and all the way forward to 2025. It is no mistake that the next municipal elections are in 2023. So this gets all of the elected officials past the next election. The other part is those reforms that Amanda was talking about. So now people will be allowed to submit anonymous complaints against officers. They will not have to file affidavits. Also, officers will not be allowed to see the video of altercations before they make statements and then revise their statements. However, the city didn't get everything they wanted. There are no restrictions on secondary employment for police officers. That was a big issue for the Inspector General several years back. That is still under negotiation and might end up in front of an arbitrator. So even when this deal is done, if it's done next week, it won't totally be done.
Yeah, deal's not done until the deal is done. So Heather, sticking with you, there's also some late breaking news today on recreational marijuana sales. Fill us in there.
That's right. So when Chicago allowed the legal sale of marijuana in Chicago, Mayor Lori Lightfoot basically carved out the entire central business district. So that's Michigan Avenue and the Loop, and banned sales there. The rules that advanced out of a city council committee today would allow marijuana to be sold legally downtown, but not on Michigan Avenue and not on State Street. But it really narrows that ban really significantly in an attempt to give more entrepreneurs a chance to locate a dispensary. And we all know that there's been so much controversy over the state's effort to make sure that Black and Latino Illinois residents who were hurt by the drug war are able to get a piece of this lucrative business. The mayor really sees this as a way to help make that happen now that things are closer to being resolved at the state level, although there's still a pending lawsuit.
Now, a lawsuit over the Chicago police stop and frisk practices that was recently granted class action status, with the judge agreeing that there's evidence police may have violated the rights of Black and Latinx Chicagoans. Here is what one of the plaintiffs told us on last night's show.
Well, there's already a big distrust in the community of the police. The frequent stops and the frisk for no reason, that only erodes trust even further. Makes no one wants to call the police when something goes wrong. Handle it yourself type of mentality. Police can't be trusted and they won't handle it well. So it completely erodes trust.
Paris, obviously a long road ahead for this lawsuit. What could the potential impact be?
Well, as you mentioned, Brandis, the judge, in allowing this case to move forward, basically said that there is sufficient evidence that the city either knew or should have known that a lot of these stops were violating citizens' Fourth Amendment rights, especially Black and Latinx citizens. And, you know, there's a long troubled history. They don't call it stop and frisk with CPD. They called it that in New York. In other cities, they've called it the contact card system, where they, you know, make street stops and they fill out a contact card with people. And the city, like a half dozen years ago, under former Superintendent Gary McCarthy, struck a deal with the ACLU, basically, because they had big-time problems with the constitutionality of this before. The city strikes a deal with the ACLU that the ACLU said, okay, you're good now, you're constitutional in the way you're reforming this contact card system. It led to much fewer stops and frisks, so to speak. But what it appears now from this lawsuit is that that number has just crept back up, and the city is not following out on the agreement that it struck several years ago.
And Amanda, we know that the Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul launching an investigation into the Joliet Police Department. What's the focus of that probe?
So it does not have anything to do with, or at least he said directly, though it may have been put on his radar by the death of Eric Lurie, a Black man, while he was in Joliet police custody in 2020. Rather, he said this is looking into the patterns and practices of the Joliet Police Department, so things like their protocols and their training. The Attorney General making clear this is not criminal in nature, nor, he says, is it meant to penalize either the department as a whole or any particular officers. By the way, the Joliet Police does have a new chief since the time of Lurie's death. He described it, Raoul described it as similar to the reviews that the Illinois Attorney General's office conducted actually into the Chicago Police Department that led to the consent decree that the CPD and city are under now. Also described it as similar to what happened in Ferguson, Missouri. But he then stopped short of it and saying, I am not going to say at this juncture that there will be a consent decree for the Joliet Police Department. So it is still seemingly fairly early for this to happen. And by the way, though, happening after that huge law that is taking effect in rolling pieces, including portions in January and then again in July, of the criminal justice law that was passed by the Illinois legislature and particularly pushed by Black legislators. And that's some of where the Attorney General's office in Illinois now has the authority to do investigations into police departments such as this one.
Okay, so we know, Amanda, as you reported earlier, of course, that state lawmakers are back in Springfield for the energy bill. But in addition to the energy bill, Republican lawmakers are calling on Democrats to take up meaningful ethics reform and say provisions currently on the table don't go far enough.
We need something that is true and meaningful. I will join my colleagues in calling for Representative Burke and others to re-engage in true negotiations with our caucus to pass something that will really turn the tide in Springfield and give people faith in state government again.
So Paris, is the shadow of former House Speaker Michael Madigan, is it still looming over Springfield?
Well, you know, Mike Madigan might have been the architect of the political system in Illinois, but many people were the beneficiaries. And it's like meet the new guard, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. A lot of lawmakers there don't want things to change. They want business as usual, to the point where the legislative inspector general in Springfield resigned, saying, my office has no power. You gave me this title and I'm supposed to investigate lawmakers, but I don't have any power to actually do so. And this bill is not really giving that office the power. And then there's the other issue of lobbying. You know, there's so many lawmakers that at the end of their career, or they leave early, and they go right into lobbying for private interests because they use that know-how and those contacts that they built up serving the public, by then going and lobbying those same former colleagues of theirs, and they're very bankable. They can make lots of money doing that. So this bill doesn't really, it tackles some of that, but it doesn't really end that revolving door of lawmakers just going right to lobbying and making lots of money. And the problem is you gotta kind of have a watchdog on that. Is this in the public interest? So that's why there's so much criticism on this ethics bill.
Okay, so Heather, there is a potential test of Alder-manic privilege that's brewing in the shape of a fight over a Northwest Side apartment complex. Remind us, what are the details and what's the latest?
Well, there's a plan to build about 300 apartments near the Cumberland stop on the CTA Blue Line. It is vehemently opposed by Alderman Anthony Napolitano, who says it is the wrong kind of development in what's now very commercial part of on just the edge of the city near Park Ridge. However, the city's housing department says this is exactly the kind of development Chicago has to approve. It's going to tackle its legacy of segregation and systemic racism. So we're coming to a head on that probably next month, and it will be a real test to see if Mayor Lori Lightfoot wants to sort of make this a stand on both of those efforts. Remember, in 2019, she campaigned against Alder-manic prerogative and vowed to do something about the city's affordable housing crisis. This will give her an opportunity, but it won't be easy because of that Alder-manic opposition.
And Paris, Chicago aldermen, they're also eligible for salary raises, but what do you think they're considering as they debate whether or not to take them?
Yeah, they're eligible for a raise of about $6,000 to $7,000. I mean, the high level right now for alder people is $123,000, so they would go up to $130,000. Some alder people have said no to raises in the past, and some alder people want to be, in solidarity with their constituents. It's been a tough year. A lot of people have been hit hard, so why should we take raises when people have been hurt? Other alder people say, hey, it's been tough for me. I've got kids in college. I'm going to take the raise. I don't mean to question any motives, but sometimes if you want to run for higher office, it looks kind of good to say, I turned down that raise, and you have some folks already coming out. Alderman Ray Lopez, the 15th Ward, said he doesn't think it's right to accept that raise. Alderman Gil Villegas in the Tribune said, I don't think it's right to accept that raise. There's some rumblings. Maybe they might be interested in running for mayor. So there's a solidarity reason. It's just not right. And then there's a political reason. Well, it looks a lot better, because then my opponent can't come and attack me and say, and in COVID-19, where everyone was getting hit, they took a raise. So that's what to watch for. Okay, and we are just about out of time, but quickly, Amanda, Alderman George Cardenas, who's running for a seat on the county's Property Tax Appeal Board, says his opponent, Tammy Went, called members of the American military cowards for leaving Afghanistan. Went said she was calling the Biden administration cowards, in fact. Now, this is a relatively obscure board, Amanda. 15 seconds. Do you think many people are going to take notice?
No, it's a relatively obscure board, and frankly, by the time elections come, this is going to come back as a relatively obscure tweet. This is not the sort of thing. The Cook County Board of Review candidates aren't going to be up on TV with things such as this. So I'm guessing by then, this will be long in the past, although unfortunately, we'll still probably be dealing with what is actually happening in Afghanistan and some hefty property tax bills.
Yeah, an interesting tack for these two to take. Okay, thanks to the Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. Up next, remembering the late Adlai Stevenson III. Stay with us.
His great-grandfather, Adlai Stevenson I, was Vice President of the United States from 1893 to 1897. His father, Adlai II, served as Illinois governor, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and a two-time Democratic nominee for president. So for Adlai Stevenson III, politics was in his blood. Among other positions, he served as a U.S. Senator from 1970 to 1981. He twice lost to Jim Thompson in races for Illinois governor. Adlai Stevenson III died on Monday at the age of 90. And back in 2009, Stevenson spoke with our Carol Marine. Even though he was a self-proclaimed reformer, he still found virtues in the old party machinery. Here's a look.
Blagojevich was the popular choice. He was not the candidate of the regular Democratic organization. In fact, the leaders, including the state chairman, came to me and asked me to run against him. That's one of the ironies. As we, and I was a reformer from day one, tried to reform our politics, always in the name of more democracy. We ended up, in many respects, making it less democratic. In the old days, he never could have been nominated. My father was nominated, a diplomat, a New Deal bureaucrat, an architect of the United Nations, nominated by the regular Democratic organization for governor, along with an eminent economist from the University of Chicago.
But
primaries were formalities. His campaign for governor cost $157,000.
But the irony here is, as a reformer, you're defending and upholding the tradition of the machine.
Well, I'm saying there's a balance. Our founders, who were creatures of the Enlightenment, men of reason, tried to create a representative democracy. We've lost some of that balance. Primaries in those days, and well into my days, were largely formalities. Party organization exercised a responsibility. All the great presidents, including Abraham Lincoln, whose delegation to the convention was organized by great-great-grandfather Jesse Felt, were candidates of party organization.
A lot of wisdom there. Again, that's the late Adlai Stevenson III and Carol Marine on Chicago Tonight back in 2009. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. As the 20th anniversary of 9/11 approaches, a look back at one of America's biggest tragedies and the state of terrorism.
And Oak Lawn is the next stop on our In Your Neighborhood series. Its fire department was among those that supported the New York Police Department and Fire Department after the attack. And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.